Hey guys, Molson here. Today I'm going through one of Vishy Anand's most famous games he played in a Scandinavian defense against Joel Luthier, and this game actually inspired me to play this particular line against a Scandinavian expert in one of my first international tournaments, which I'll go over in my next video. So in this particular game, it started out e4 d5, pawn takes, queen takes d5, knight c3 and queen a5. So we get into the main line of the Scandinavian, which I went through in my Scandinavian video if you haven't already checked that out. d4, knight f6, knight f3, and black played the move pawn to c6. So this is a very typical way to play this system for black. The bishop goes to c4, one of the main lines of course, bishop f5, and white opted for the line knight to e5, hitting the pawn on f7. Here black plays the move pawn to e6, so far fairly normal, and then white plays the move pawn to g4. Also a very typical idea to harass this bishop on f5 because it doesn't have so many squares to go to, and this is a typical recurring theme in openings like the Scandinavian and Caro-Kann and so on. If bishop e4 here, then I think white's idea is to castle kingside, and we see that if the bishop goes to d5, white can always drop the bishop back. White also has options of playing g5, and yes, the king's a little bit open, but white is getting a very quick attack, potentially with the kingside pawns pushing up the board. So the bishop goes to g6, white continues with h4. Of course, black can't push the h-pawn because we'll just capture the bishop on g6, so it goes knight d7, a very important move in this position if you're playing black side. Knight takes, and h5. The bishop goes to e4, and then rook h3 is played. So this was the whole point of this variation. This rook is actually lifting into the game, and this is what sort of caught my eye and made this line so appealing at the time. So in this particular game, Luthier opted for bishop g2, but I think nowadays everyone plays the move bishop d5, and this is well known to be absolutely fine for black. But after the move bishop to g2, Vishy played the move rook to e3, which is the whole point of this variation. White is threatening the move pawn to f3 now, and the rook is on a very aggressive square, sometimes preparing the move pawn to d5 as well. Knight went to b6. The bishop drops back to d3. So we see that the bishop is better placed on d3 than it is on b3, which is the obvious square to move the piece to, and we'll see why later on. Here, for example, if black casually just castles queenside, then we can just play bishop to d2, and the whole point is that we're threatening the moves f3, and we're also threatening all sorts of discoveries with our knight because now we're lining up our bishop against the queen, which doesn't have too many squares to go to. So black already has to be very, very careful. For example, g6, queen e2 can be played with the threat of f3 if pawn takes f3 and the bishop on g2 is very short on squares. So instead the game continued knight d5, and here is the whole point of Vishy's opening preparation, and it's that in this position we don't actually have to move the rook even though it's being attacked. Our knight's also being attacked, but instead we can utilize the fact that this bishop on g2, even though it gained a tempo by attacking our rook, it's very badly placed now, so we can trap it with the move pawn to f3. Yes, we can give up this rook, but we'll end up with two pieces for the rook, which should be very advantageous for us. So bishop b4 was played, king f2, so we attack the bishop, and now bishop takes on c3 was played, pawn takes, queen takes c3. So we're giving up a lot of the pawns on the queen side, but notice that we do get the dark squared bishop for it, so that's going to be important, the fact that we get the bishop pair for it. Rook to b1, queen takes d4. The queen is sort of lining up against our queen, so already what you should be noticing is that there could be potential tactics in this position for you, so you should keep that in mind. Maybe there's some rook e6 and bishop g6 check later on. At the moment it doesn't quite work because of the pin, but it's something you should always be keeping in mind. Rook takes b7, rook to d8, And here is when Vichy plays a very, very strong move, and he utilizes the fact that I mentioned earlier that there's potential tactics because these queens are lined up. So you should start to sort of get a feel for tactics and see potential tactics arising before they actually happen in your games. That way it's much easier for you to actually look for moves when you already sort of have the ideas in your head. So first he plays a very, very accurate move here. He plays the move pawn to h6. So the idea of pawn to h6 is to attack this pawn here, but he's also opening up some lines potentially for this bishop later on, which you'll see in a moment. So notice in this position he's not afraid of knight takes, because we'll just take back, attack the queen, and then we could just capture the bishop. Also, this bishop isn't going anywhere, so we don't want to take it just yet, because then black will take the rook on e3. So after h6, pawn takes was played, and now Vichy plays probably the best move of this particular game, and one of the best moves in his particular career, and that was bishop to g6. Excellent move, creating a discovered attack on this queen on d4, and now black's in a whole lot of trouble because he's getting hit on f7, getting hit on e6, and the queen is also getting hit. So everything is under attack here. Okay, so for starters, I don't think black has any time here to capture the knight, capture the rook on e3, because there's just too many threats on f7 as well as bishop a3 and so on and so forth. So instead, he could try to move queen takes d1. This runs into a forced mate actually after rook takes e6. This is white's entire idea. And after knight e7, we have rook takes e7, king f8, bishop takes h6, king g8, and bishop takes f7, which is Vichy's whole point. So in the game, Joel tried to move knight to e7 instead. After knight to e7, we have queen takes d4, rook takes d4, and Vichy just kept things very, very simple here. No need to overcomplicate things. Just played the move rook to d3, offering a trade of rooks and removing this rook from sort of the potentially dangerous d file. So the rook went back. Of course, if he just trades off, then we maintain our bishop pair, and more importantly, the bishop on g2 is lost. So rook goes to d8, and here we have rook takes d8, king takes d8, and bishop d3, and black resigned because this bishop on g2 is lost. So we can see that was a great game by Vichy, just putting that rook on e3 and sort of utilizing the fact that this tempo gaining move at the start with bishop g2 actually got the bishop into a lot of trouble, and he utilized a lot of tactics with that pin on the queen on d4. So I hope you enjoyed this game if you haven't already seen it before, and I look forward to showing you the next video. Catch you then.